Steven Moffat has written a lot of TV, and we've seen most of it. He's now ventured beyond TV into the realm of theatre, with his comedy The Unfriend, which the three of us have experienced in some form or another. So, we are going to discuss The Unfriend today, getting into topics like how the play links to other Moffat work, particularly when it comes to the focus on murder. What's different about the play compared to his other work, what the play says about being British, whether the play is just joyous escapism or is saying something more, and the nature of making a kind of division there, how the play fits into the progression of Moffat's career and writing, and plenty of other things as well. Doing all that talking today will be myself, Neo from Australia, along with my friends from England, Tyler and Ingiga. First, I want to ask you both how you experienced the play and what other works of Steven Moffat you have read, watched, absorbed. Tyler, you first.
I went to see it in the West End after 3 long years of COVID setbacks and personal setbacks. I was originally meant to see it in Chichester in the August run, Chichester Festival run. But then COVID happened, and then I had a couple of personal things in 2022. So we finally got to see it in London, because gladly they put on a West End show for, how long has it run? I think it's run for about 3 months, isn't it? Which is about the maximum that a West End show runs for. So that's pretty impressive that he got to the West End in the Criterion Theatre right on Piccadilly Circus. So yeah, that was it was a nice day out at least.
What other Moffat stuff have you absorbed? Have you seen Press Gang?
No, I haven't seen Press Gang. I've seen
Joking Apart.
I've seen Joking Apart. I've seen season 1 of Coupling. I've seen, I think, every iteration of his stuff since, other than Time Traveller's Wife.
Right. Gig, how did you absorb the play, and what other Moffat have you absorbed into yourself?
Well, I engaged my imagination to a great deal while reading the new edition of the play script, basically. So I imagined it happening in my head while reading through it, which obviously is not the same thing as what they're selling on the West End. But in terms of what the script is as a prompt, I think it's something to be getting on with. And in terms of other Moffat stuff, obviously I've watched Doctor Who, is Sherlock, Jekyll, Dracula. I've watched Joking Apart. First 2 seasons of Press Gang, which I'm told is the only really important bit, and some bits of Coupling as well.
Well, okay. As for myself, I also read the script book. In fact, I have both, because I saw 2 versions came out. I thought, won't it be fascinating to compare the differences? That's another thing we're going to dive into, because differences between them do exist. The first script book has that poster on it that they shot before the ill-fated, never actually happened original run that COVID put off. And then the later script book to the West End one has the current poster on it. There are some differences between them we'll get into. I've read both. But I did not see the play in person, much to my irritation, because I am oceans away from England. But I've lived myself through Tyler's experience of the play, and another friend of ours has also seen the play, and he flagged me up a few things about it in advance, which I appreciated. As for Moffat's stuff, I've absorbed pretty much all the TV stuff besides Sherlock, and a few odds and ends like his Murder Most Horrid and Stay Lucky episodes. So we're all very familiar with Steven Moffat's writing, basically. Would it be fair to characterize ourselves as fanatics?
I feel like we need
connoisseurs. I would call myself a Moffat connoisseur.
Yeah, connoisseurs, something like that.
Connoisseurs.
Yeah, a word that's not quite as invested as fanatic, but nonetheless not as fanish as fanatic, but nonetheless very interested in from a critical perspective.
Of course. And we're not starting with this. This is probably something we'll wind to towards the end. But I think Steven Moffat's currently most recent television show, Inside Man, the BBC Netflix show with David Tennant. Isn't that a curiosity? BBC show with David Tennant. I think it links into this play a lot in interesting ways. We'll get into that. But to start with, so Gig and I read the play in our hands, whereas Tyler, you actually saw it. What do you think we missed out on?
I think the main thing is the obvious thing, isn't it? Is the performers, is that you missed. What you would have seen in the script is is not the same as what you would have seen in person, in the sense that those actors were capable of bringing those things to life in a way that you wouldn't have read it in the way that they'd have performed it, because they're seasoned actors, Rhys Shearsmith and Amanda Abington and Frances Barber, and the two younger actors. What to say about them? Rhys Shearsmith, I find hit or miss a lot of the time. I like his writing work more than I like his acting work. I think he's very much a professional, and he's good at what he does. But I don't tend to jive with a lot of his stuff. Amanda Abington, I've always liked in everything I've seen. I think, again, for fear of overstepping the mark, I do find her a little bit one note, but I do like her. I think she's a good comic actor. And Frances Barber, I was surprised by, because she's quite outspoken on stuff that I don't like and don't agree with on Twitter, but she was very good in this play. So
and she's not the only one in the cast who has spoken that way about the things you're talking about.
I think that not seeing Frances Barber perform that character is performing Elsa is you did miss out there, unfortunately. Yeah.
I do have a slight question. What was the running time like, just for like seeing it? Because reading it, obviously, it feels quite short. But I'm just wondering, like, did it feel like more maybe dragged out live, or very concise, or?
No, it was short. Yeah, we I as we were leaving the theatre, I did overhear mumblings of, "Oh, that was a short play, wasn't it?" I think it was about an hour and 45 total runtime.
And that's including the interval, I assume.
I don't quite remember. I think it might be. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, there was an interval. There was a 15-minute interval. Yeah, I think it might have. I think it was at least 1:45, if not 2 hours.
To do with the live performance of the play, my other friend who's seen it, Cats as we call him, said he was very impressed by the way they handled the video calls, the Facebook calls, in the actual staging of the play. From my understanding, it wasn't a pre-recorded video on a screen like you might expect. Can you talk us through how they actually did that? What happened there?
Yes. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. One of the staging things that I did like is that the top half of the stage was. I'll try and run you through it. So the bottom half of the stage was the interior of the house, and the top half was it's the facade of the house. But it's like a holographic, not holographic. What's the word? Yeah, a projection. It's like a projection of the house. So that projection changed to it wasn't a recording. I didn't know that it wasn't a recording. I thought it was a recording. So that's interesting. I didn't tell the difference. I'm not sure how Cats knew the difference. But anyway, that changed when they were looking at the Google search of Elsa, and then it changed again when they had that phone call, the FaceTime call. So yeah, that was quite nice. They only did it the once. I think they only did it for like 5 minutes max, quite early on, which is unfortunate. So they didn't use much. They didn't make much use of that, but it was a nice feature. Yeah. Yeah,
I suppose regarding the pre-recorder thing, the only reason I was curious is that there's a point where Alex walks out the door, like the son, like he opens the door and like he's there on the certainly as written, and he appears there on the screen. I was just wondering, like maybe that's would there have been maybe some way to tell, like if that was like not synced up or something, if you see what I'm talking about. If since he goes out of the stage and then he appears on the camera, did that not happen? I mean, was it different? Like
I don't recall that happening, and I don't think that's a case of me having bad memory. I don't think that is how it happened.
Right.
I don't think that happened while I was there. It may just be poor memory thing, but yeah, I don't think that happened at all.
Interesting. That it frustrates me reading. I mean, in general, reading a play is what can you call it? It's like watching TV through a. I can't really think of a metaphor here.
It's like reading a screenplay for TV instead of watching TV.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a pretty close comparison.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but you're not doing it right, are you? It's like I think of so many stories of people disliking Shakespeare in high school, and inevitably it all comes down to them treating plays like books. in my opinion, treating it as if Macbeth is a novel to read rather than something you need to see performed because it's live, it's a play, it's meant to be alive. And I think especially for comedy, reading this, when I read plays, I tend to read them out loud to myself because I feel like that at least I'm kind of approximating something of how it's, meant to work there. But even then, I'm no Francis Barber. There's only so much I can do to entertain myself with something like this. It really is a half measure of an experience. I do really value that the script books are around to buy, to get an idea of what the play is, but I'm so constrained by just reading the script. So I really do appreciate having someone to walk us through what it was actually like. I know another related Moffat thing there is the Time Traveller's Wife is currently having a play run, I think in England right now, as a musical. And, I'm very familiar with the story, and I just wish I could see, how are they realizing the way the main character, Henry, time travels, the way he zaps around. I need to see how this is done, but I can't see it. It frustrates me so much. So I feel like reading a play isn't just like a half measure of an experience. It's almost like a taunt in a way. It's not Moffat's fault that he can't magic this play into Australia, but it's like, I want to see the funny. I want to see the humor. I want to laugh, but I'm just alone in a room reading this to myself. It's almost quite sad in a way.
It's funny that you bring up the Time Traveller's Wife, because I was just thinking the other day that I was coming to a point where I was finally going to possibly read the book first and then watch the show and everything, because I hadn't brought myself to doing it yet. And then I found out that this play was showing, and I simply cannot afford to take myself to the theatre again in the next couple of months while it's showing. So I'm going to have to avoid doing the Time Traveller's Wife so that I don't get the urge to spend my money on going back to London for another theatre show that I can't see.
Yeah.
I'd say the thing about a script is that even though it's not obviously what the audience gets, it is written for people to read. It's just those people happen to be the production team, like the director, the cast, the design, all those people. So nonetheless, the script is written to elicit reactions and ideas and responses from those people, the people who will be making the play. So I think what you can take from reading a script really is that if you approach it as if you were going to put it on yourself, if you imagine like what your version of it would be based on the prompt that the script is giving you, then you can get a measure of what kind of potential the script has. Because at the end of the day, like, Mark Gatiss reading the script, he's going to have to think like, how good a script is this? Like, what can I do with this? Like, what potential does this have? What does this give me? Same goes for all the actors and designers and pretty much everyone. So I think you can get some degree of understanding of like what you can tell if a script is good from reading it, I think, is the basic thing.
Yeah, of course.
You can't tell how good this finished production of the play is from reading it, but you can get some sense of it as long as you approach the script with a sense of, with a view to how it would look like on stage, rather than just reading it like a book in your head or like a story in your head. I think as long as you picture yourself like almost watching it, or at least like experiencing it in that live setting, like how it might look on stage, how the set might look, then you're getting somewhere towards what Moffat was putting on the paper, if you see what I mean.
I think it's interesting how you frame that, because I think there's a kind of similarity there to something we'll get into soon, which is, I see the play talked about, by Gatiss, by Moffat, by people who've seen it, and kind of some people are like, this is fantastic because it's just a bunch of fun. In these dark times, in these troublesome times, in these COVID-ridden times, in these, however you want to frame the goings on in England or the world or the universe or whatever, these shadowy times, at least we've got a lovely play just about, the bathroom. Isn't that fantastic? For an hour and 40 minutes, we get a laugh about bowel movements. It's this joyous escapism of the play. I get to turn my brain off and just laugh. A lot of people talk about the play this way. And then others, less of them, but others are like, well, actually, it is a play. It is about things. It's about being British. It's about murder. It's about performativity. It's about, transformation. It's about this and that. It's not just, it's not just a play.
It's about Donald Trump.
It's about Donald Trump. It's about things. Of course, it's about things. It's by Steven Moffat. It's going to be about something.
It's about Brexit and smartphones.
Inevitability. Kind of the way you're talking there, Gig, it kind of reminds me of that divide in the sense that, like, I think as script readers, you and I can't really be the joyous escapist viewer in the same way, because we don't get to sit back passively and just have the actors' comedic performances, play to us. We kind of much more involved in the constructions, and our minds need to kind of conjure up, like you're saying, how would we do the play? Because it's our brains kind of making it there. Mark Gatiss isn't in our rooms to direct the play for us. We kind of have to direct it in our heads as a reader.
Yeah.
I think is what you're saying, which kind of probably primes us more to this is about Donald Trump and bathroom, and things more than just getting to enjoy the play necessarily. Not that there's no enjoyment in producing it in your head, of course, but do you get what I mean? The kind of escapism element is kind of dulled when you're reading it.
That is an enormously good point, I think, that you've made. I think the environment of being sat in an audience with all these people laughing and basically sitting back, I think there is something fundamentally passive about it. Maybe not quite as passive as TV and movies, but nonetheless, I think just the environment of theatrical comedy like this, I think kind of is primed to maybe numb the viewer or lull them into some sort of sense of security. And I think if you're reading a script like we are, and you're constructing it, and you're looking at the words, and particularly the words Moffat used to describe particular actions, you are approaching it from so much more of an analytical angle. You're looking at the construction. You're not really getting the experience streamlined into your face hole the way that a theatre spectator might. So yeah, it's very, very different, and that's obviously going to inform how we interpret the play.
I think to throw a couple of C words, not that one, around, I think especially after COVID, when you're in a communal setting, watching a play like this all together, specifically when it's a comedy, there's got to be I assume a big element of catharsis around. You're all laughing together, and it's just fun. There's jokes. It's really funny. The actors are doing a great job. You're all together in a room. You get to enjoy it together. I saw Mark Gatiss in a talk about the play talking about how Francis Barber was like, we're not going to do the play, and Gatiss, was saying as well, we're not going to do the play in a half-measure social distance way when we could. We could have actually brought it back brought it back. We could have brought the play forward a bit earlier if we did it in one of those super COVID-y ways. We had a third of the audience there and that sort of thing. We weren't going to do that because we need the comedic catharsis element. We need everyone there. We need everyone happy to be there. That's part of how it works. It needs to be everyone is happy to be in the room and are just kicking back together.
That was when COVID happened, and then last year I was directing Frances in something out in TV job, and she said, "I don't want to do it until everyone can come back." I remember thinking, if we do this play to a third empty socially distanced house with masks on, we might as well not bother.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we waited. It's been well worth it.
All that lovely stuff we don't get alone in our rooms reading it, really, do we?
Yeah, you kind of have to imagine where the laughs would come in, almost. And I will say also for theatre goers, and I think maybe British theatre goers, as I don't know if it's as common in other places, but I think if you're in a theatre audience in Britain, I think there is almost a compulsion to laugh at some points. Maybe it's almost like a nervous laughter that I think sometimes you'll see audiences laugh at things that maybe aren't even that funny. just a sense of the tittering. I feel like laughter, because it is the most socially acceptable form of vocal response the audience can have in a theatre, rather than loudly crying or saying, "Oh, this is boring" or anything like that. I think people are inclined to do it a lot. So I think comedy sort of thrives on that sort of nervous tension. They can get reactions from things that maybe aren't even necessarily that funny or interesting. Not to foreshadow any comments or opinions here. I'm just saying as a general comment on British theatre.
There was a guy in the row in front of me that I almost found funnier than the play itself, because what he was doing was essentially that. He was he was laughing really, really obnoxiously, but he was every time he laughed, he'd sort of look at his partner as if to ensure that she was also laughing, or engage with the reaction to the play in the same way that she was engaging with it.
What else, communally watching the play? Was there anything else interesting about the audience reactions?
No, it was just that, really. There was I don't know. That was I wish I'd thought about this earlier, because I'm sure there was. There was a guy directly in front of me who there was a pillar, because you get cheaper seats if your view is slightly obstructed. So there was a pillar 2 rows ahead of me, and there was a guy in front of me that kept stroking it. So I don't know what that says. Probably Freudian or something. I don't know. There was, what you were saying reminded me of. I've recently done some work on a guy called Denis Diderot, a French playwright in the 18th century, and his whole stuff is about spectators in a play being an empathetic, it being an empathetic communal response. So the relationship between the people on the stage and the people in the stalls are kind of is a symbiotic dominant and submissive kind of relationship, but it is a relationship. It is an empathetic relationship between the two of them, and you are two. You're the actors on the stage are one, and you as an audience are a collective whole. So I guess that kind of feeds into what you're saying. So that was kind of on the brain at the time.
I think particularly with a play like this that's so concerned with like the characters being embarrassed and humiliated in some ways, I think that's going to play into what you just said a lot, like the idea of a symbiotic empathetic response.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, as I'm sure you probably read. I'm sure you can gauge this from reading it anyway. That it did really feel strongly about. It's a play about discomfort and politeness. So I think a lot of the audience reaction, a lot of what you're seeing, is visual. And actually, that's a good point, because I did want to say on here that you won't have been able to recognise in reading the play script that there was so much visual acting, visual work going on. A lot of the time, there was long pauses and long silences and long uncomfortable glances between characters and stuff that you won't have been able to see reading it. That is, Mark Gatiss' direction and these people's acting, that you just won't know. And I just can't tell you these specific details of the play, and I can't iterate them to you or to the podcast listeners in any form. So you are missing a large chunk, yeah.
Do you have a question? Do you recall if anything in particular got the biggest laugh, like, of the night? Was there anything that was like the audience reacted to like particularly well?
Can I guess before you say it, Tyler? I have a guess what it would be.
Yeah, go on.
When the policeman is in the bathroom and Peter offers to flush it for him because he's a busy man, the policeman. That would be my guess from reading it.
I think, yeah, that was my instant. Yeah, I've been scrolling in my head, in my mind palace through the different funny bits, and I think it must be that one. Yeah, there was a few. I think the Donald Trump gag at the start got a few more laughs than I hoped it would. But we were in central London, so that's no surprise. The final scene got a lot of laughter, but that's kind of like as a cathartic thing, isn't it? So that doesn't really count. I think it's the policeman and the toilet humor stuff. Yeah. I think partly also is that again, this is something that you wouldn't really have quite been able to see in reading, that scene goes on really uncomfortably long, and I know that definitely comes across in your reading of it, but when you're watching it visually and when there are long pauses and when actors are taking a long time to say their lines, it really does feel like it's going on forever. So in kind of like a Stuart Lee stand-up sense, where
I was going to mention that,
the joke kind of folds in on its the joke kind of folds at some point. You stop laughing, but it does it for so long that you end up laughing. It becomes funny again. He has this really good bit where he explains his stand-up, the shill bottle bit, where he's explaining that after so long of repeating the same thing, you have to kind of tough it out as a stand-up doing what he's doing, in that the audience will stop laughing, you'll stop getting a response for like a couple of minutes, but you have to just keep going, keep pressing ahead with it, and people laugh again. And that is what happened in that scene. There was like an uncomfortable minute or two when nobody was laughing anymore, and everyone was like, okay, this is it. All right, come on now. And then eventually we all started laughing even harder. So it was actually really, it was well done, but it's definitely one of those that if you read it, I'd have cringed if I was reading it, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
Whereas I watched it and cringed, but laughed. It was well performed. It was well thought out.
I think before we get more specific about stuff that happens in the play, just running through why this exists and where it came from, I think is worthwhile. So, like Tyler mentioned, this has been a long time ruin with how long his tickets and whatnot were getting delayed. So, in February 2020, the play was announced and that it was going to have its premiere as part of a 2020 festival. But then the big thing happened, didn't it? And so it kept getting postponed and postponed and postponed and postponed. But where the play came from, like why does this exist at all? It's based on a true story. The opening kind of bits of it basically are true.
Well, Peter and Debbie are two people I actually know in real life, and the first 20 minutes of this play actually happened. They were on a cruise, and they met a flamboyant American lady whom they sort of liked, but found a bit much, and she seemed to know everyone on the boat. But they did that thing, that way of getting rid of somebody, which is we must keep in touch, and exchanged emails. And when this woman announced that she was coming to stay, to their great horror, they thought it was maybe worth Googling her. Because she had rather an unusual name, I won't give the real name, I'll give the name she has in the play, which is Elsa Jean Krakowski. They discovered she was a killer. I mean, an actual multiple killer, a serial killer, someone who was on the loose only because of on a legal technicality, someone who committed really, really horrible, awful murders, not nice murders, like killing an abusive husband or something, really horrid ones. And she was coming to stay. And they had to spend an agonizing night trying to compose an email that wasn't too offensive. To say, basically, I mean, we're making no judgments, but honestly, our kids are against murdering, something like that. They eventually managed to send that email and forestall her, but in the play version, Elsa turns up, and they spend their time in an agony of embarrassment wondering how to raise the issue of the fact that she's a multiple killer.
Well, it's based on a true story, which fell into Steven's lap. Some friends of his and his wife Sue, they were on holiday. They're called Peter and Debbie, as they are in the play, and they were on a cruise, and they met this very vivacious American lady who was, really very on PC and the life and soul of the party, and everyone loved her. She was outrageous, and at the end of the holiday, they swapped emails, as one sometimes foolishly does, never thinking that she'd get in touch, and she did get in touch a few months later. And they found themselves, Peter told me, he said, if you can send an email through gritted teeth, they asked her to come and stay, and she emailed back saying, how long could I come for? And he went, a fortnight. And so it was all arranged, and then, because he didn't really know anything about her, he Googled her. And then he rang Debbie at work and said, I've just Googled her. What's the worst thing you can imagine about her? That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, exactly. I'm assuming that some of it is fiction.
Yes, well, in reality, they emailed her back and said, we've Googled you, and they never heard from her again.
Oh, really?
And then the jumping off point is that they're basically too British to say no.
It's about a couple, based on some friends of mine actually, a couple who meet a lively, charismatic American called Elsa Jean Krakowski on a cruise. And they make their final farewell in the traditional holiday way by exchanging emails in the certain hope of never hearing from that person again. However, Elsa does email them, and she does decide to come and see them. And they're horrified by this, but they run out of excuses. So they've got the flamboyant American coming. At that point, they decide to Google her and discover that, as they put it, what is the single worst thing you can find out about someone who's coming to stay? She's a murderer. Yes, she's a murderer. She's this all actually happened. So that I've killed several people, and really not nice murders. Like, if you kill an abusive husband, I mean, you get a grant for that. So it was an actual proper, really horrible murders, and she's coming to stay.
I see.
And in real life, what my friends, Peter and Debbie, I changed their names to Peter and Debbie in the play. What they do is they try to compose an email to her to say, please just don't. And they can't find the wording. How do you say it? I realize that we've realized that you're a murderer who's not imprisoned because of a legal technicality, but who are we to judge? Please don't come and visit us. In real life, that's what happened. They sent the email and never heard from Elsa again.
Yep.
Elsa isn't a real name because I'm frightened of the real one.
Absolutely. Damn right.
Elsa, yeah. But in the play, I alter it so that Elsa turns up.
So when your friends first told you that story, how long did it then take for you to think that is winning and I can do something with it?
Instantly. Okay. We were away in France with Peter, whose real name is Peter, and sitting on a patio with my brother-in-law and Peter, and we were just exchanging stories, and he started telling me this one. And I had this terrible, cold idea that maybe there was another writer in earshot and I'd have to kill them, because I thought, no, that's perfect. And I said to him, can I have that? And he said, what do you mean? I said, can I have it? Can I write a play based on that? And just change it so that she turns up. And he laughed and said, yes, so long as I didn't change his name. I didn't. Sorry, Peter. And so he could come to the first night. He never thought it was going to happen, but a year and a half later, I told him I'd written it.
It absolutely has. So when he was telling you that story, was that little nugget about manners the thing also that attracted you? Because this is a comedy of manners, isn't it? It's about the difficulty that people have being honest when they've got this terrible portcullis of manners in front of them.
Yes. I mean, it's absolutely about that. I find it very, very difficult ever to be offensive to someone if they're actually in the room. I'm brilliant if they're not there and no one can hear me. I'm amazingly incisive and interrogative. But the moment I'm actually face to face with a human being, I can't say anything. I just couldn't imagine how I would explain to someone that they couldn't cook for my children because they might poison them. I'd probably just take the poisoning risk, you know?
But it is based on a true story. I don't know if you guys were aware of that. That's quite interesting.
I was not aware of that. That is kind of interesting.
No, I wasn't aware of that.
So it's not just Moffat being obsessed with domestic murders or anything for any particular reason. It was actually inspired by something that happened to him.
Where the play started, because I think the timeline gets a bit tricky when COVID happens and we start forgetting when everything happened. Moffat was writing this in Dracula Castle while Dracula was being filmed. You know, the actual old Dracula Castle that they filmed Dracula in from the old Dracula movie. He was writing it in there.
Stephen wrote this on spec when we were doing Dracula, and I didn't know what he was up to. He was literally in the corner of Castle Dracula in the Czech Republic laughing to himself. And I said, "What are you up to?" And eventually he let me know, and then let me read it. And I loved it. I just thought it was such a funny idea. And so, you know, Stephen's long wanted to write a play. He really loves the theatre, and he loves Neil Simon and those kind of classic sort of Broadway comedies. So I was very taken with it. And he asked me if I'd sort of show it around because he didn't really know anyone in theatre. And I sort of became a bit evangelical about it.
Moffat used Gatiss a lot with this because this isn't Moffat's first play he's written. He wrote one a couple of years ago, you know, when he was big off coming from Doctor Who and Sherlock.
Man with stellar TV career approaches the world of theatre and says, "I've written a play." What's the reaction? Dare they be snooty to you?
Well, let me tell you what the reaction was, because this isn't the first play. When I left Doctor Who and Sherlock, and I thought, well, I really fancy writing a play, I wrote a play which was not this one. And I thought, being as, you know, I'm me, surely the whole world will flock to my door and weep with gratitude when I hand over. No, they didn't. I sent it off, and most of them didn't reply. So,
did they not know the name?
Yeah, I'm sure they did, but you know, once you take the TARDIS away, who cares? It was so.
Gosh,
no,
it's brutal. I mean, are they that snooty?
It's not snooty. I think they just didn't like the play, and that's fair enough. Of that.
Yeah, no, I suppose
Yeah.
that is. Well, is it though? I mean, because TV is. I'm just amazed that there's the possibility even that people in theatre might look down on wildly
I don't think they looked down on me.
TV.
I think they didn't want to put that play on. I mean, that's. I think there's a sort of illusion that you get to a sort of level in the industry where people just say, well, he's famous, so we better spend millions on him. That doesn't happen. That never happens. I've got loads of stuff that's been turned down.
Okay.
I'm quite right too, by the way. Quite right too.
Yeah.
I think he's been thinking about it for a long time, but I guess, you know, literally 10 years on Doctor Who and Sherlock, there was no room for anything else for 10 years. So I know it was a big thing for him coming to the end of his time on both shows, that he was looking forward to a kind of new challenge. And I think it was just the perfect time to have a go, I think. And also, you know, you can't just conjure these things out of the air. The brilliant thing about this story is it literally fell into his lap.
So when he wrote this new play, he made sure Gatiss, you know, who's much more experienced with plays, was the one to kind of shop it around.
What do you make of that? Do you think that it was a case that it was simply not a good enough play to stage, or do you think he just didn't market it well enough, or like his agent wasn't competent in plays, or what?
The earlier play, well, he says...
I just come out of Doctor Who and Sherlock, and I was just going into another couple of huge projects, and I just wanted to do something different to prove I was still young and vibrant. It didn't work.
Oh, I think it did. I love
the fact that, like, just an amuse-bouche to you is a West End play.
Oh, come now, I didn't know that.
A mild diversion. Yeah.
No, I wrote a play. Listen. I mean, before anyone thinks that I'm powerful or useful or effective in any way whatsoever, the first thing I did when I left Doctor Who and Sherlock was get very pumped up about how great I am. I mean, not just because I'm an expert epidemiologist and economist, but because I'm a great writer. And I thought, if I write a play, then surely the entire West End will come to me and say, Stephen, we must put on it immediately in the biggest stadium imaginable to humankind. And I thought that's exactly why. So I wrote a play and nobody wanted it. I mean, I've sent it to theatres and they didn't reply. And I was thinking, I see.
Ah, wow.
This is life outside the TARDIS, is it? I mean, it's all Chris Chibnall,
This
isn't it?
will be welcome news to writers all across the country out there, I imagine.
Yes, young writers, you'll still get turned down and ignored when you're successful. Come and join the party.
What a great message to go home from.
Yeah, the room will always be full of backs.
But you do, when it did finally struggle
No,
onto the West End
that's
stage.
not what happened. That play never got on.
Oh, sorry. I
Oh,
beg your pardon.
On that play,
so this
was
isn't
turned
really
down.
your first play.
My
This is
first
your
play,
first
my real first play,
Right.
was rejected comprehensively and largely ignored by the theatre world, including friends of mine who just went, who were encouraging enough to say things like, So now the advice I give to young writers is if you get turned down or your show flops, and mostly you'll get turned down and mostly your show will flop. So listen to this, it's useful. Blame yourself and write something else.
Right.
So I thought, and now finally I thought, oh God, that sounded so heroic when I said it.
I'm
Didn't
gonna
it?
do
It sounded
it.
great and wise and mighty as I spoke from Mount Olympus. And then I came down off Mount Rushmore and said, all right, I now have to write another play and follow my own advice. So I wrote a
if
second
it isn't
play.
the consequences of my own actions.
So it sounds like his thoughts and the feedback for it was just that earlier play wasn't quite good enough.
But he would say that, wouldn't he? I mean, that's quite like a Moffat self-deprecating.
Maybe it went to their spam folders.
The email service developed a fault, you could say. Yeah, but this one has been quite a success from all my understanding of it. It's gone on to West End. It seems to be doing well.
Getting glowing reviews from The Spectator.
It was fully booked out when I went on a Friday night.
The British are ready to laugh. They're ready for some laughter. Moffat has provided.
Yeah, would you say it targets its intended audience particularly well? Do you think, given the success?
It's very declarative, isn't it? It starts very clear about who it wants to enjoy this, and it carries that through. Although I was expecting it to be much more political, because a lot of the copy for it, years ago was like a Trump-loving person comes to, town. But reading, I think, like, even the Trump thing in the first couple of pages, it's kind of contextualized that Elsa is like poking fun at Peter. Like, Peter's saying, I like being angry. She goes on a big Trump thing, and then she like smiles, and it's like, I made you angry, and they like laugh about it together. So even like the little bit of Trump stuff you get in here is not just like someone being randomly pro-Trump. It's like contextualized within a friendly exchange. So it's really not... I mean, there is undercurrents. There's subtext about Trump or things like that later on. But I think the direct in the text Trump stuff is nowhere near as like political as I was expecting from how the play was kind of built up.
Well, that's interesting because what I remember of it from seeing it is quite vividly that she was like a caricature of that kind of America. She was I think what Frances Barber was pulling from was Joan Rivers. She was like, even the accent, she was so like obnoxiously whinily vocal she was so American, obnoxiously caricaturally American. So yeah, what I took from that is conservative American.
Yeah, I think that kind of American caricature and stereotype is so wedded up and kind of muddled up and mixed up with the Trump fan kind of stereotypes. They're kind of almost the same thing, aren't they? Like I think if you do like that stereotypical American, it will have Trump subtext just because Trump exists and because his fans are tend to be that kind of person. I think it's so you don't necessarily have to be going out of your way to do Trump thing to end up both feeling a bit like Trumpish and also nonetheless just not necessarily being intentionally that. It's
worth bringing up, talking about, Tyler, you asked why did theatre people not like the earlier play Moffat wrote. Not everyone liked The Unfriend, before it was produced, like when the script was just being shown around by Gatiss. And he said the response he got from some people was, is it just funny? Like...
Eventually he let me read it, and then he asked me if I'd get it seen, because he didn't really know anyone in the theatre world. And I showed it to a few people, and to my amazement, people were a bit sniffy about it. And one person actually said, for deathless comment, is it just funny? And I said...
You can hiss at that moment.
But I said, well, first of all, that's like saying, are you too sexy? You know, it's a wonderful thing to be, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Oh, is this what it is? It's just a 1 hour, 40-minute comedy about, I don't know, bathrooms and making fun of Americans and whatnot.
Were they expecting more of a Sherlock-type Mind Palace thing?
Perhaps.
I would respond to the question to that. Do you know, Neo, geographically, or either of you, I guess, where Chichester is?
No.
Where the original run was supposed to be. So Chichester is right at the very bottom of it's the very far south of England, right at the very bottom. It's a small town. And actually, I didn't know this at the time. I only found this out recently. It's one of the most conservative constituencies, like consistently conservative and vehemently conservative constituencies in the country. And it's a small place with a small theatre, and it's not a big deal at all. It will be like, I mean, I suppose I could pull a name out of the hat, but Neo wouldn't get it. But anybody British who's listening, and I suppose Gig would understand it. It would be like touring in like Stoke-on-Trent or like Leicester. Or, you know, like just kind of, you know, like nowhere really. It's not like Birmingham or Manchester or London. It's not a big deal. Chichester's like nothing. So it kind of it was almost never meant to be, but you know, it happened, and then I guess somebody on the West End noticed that it was doing well and liked it, I suppose. But yeah, Chichester is it's kind of a miracle that it ever happened at all, because it's a small place with a small theatre.
I was just going to say, I suppose the question of it playing to, like you say, it was a particularly conservative sort of constituency. Well, the play is sort of almost sending up the Guardian reader archetype, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Peter says something like that at the start of the play. Yeah. So it's sort of that. I mean, obviously it's Moffat writing from a position of obviously knowing he is also that kind of man, and fraternizes with that kind of person, with that kind of a social class and type of, and obviously, you know, the whole domestic marriage with neurotic obsessions, trying to deal with things. Obviously, it's Moffat writing from experience, but you know, nonetheless, it is also kind of sending up that kind of person. So I can see how it can play to maybe a range of audiences. Because I think obviously the sort of liberal Guardian reader audience will be tittering about, ha, that's so true. Whereas nonetheless, if you hate that kind of person, you might find it entertaining as well.
I think there's a... this is complicated. This is actually very fitting the more I think about it. I think there's a element to which... I hope you guys aren't offended by this. I think there's an element to which particularly a certain type of British person, this kind of stereotype actually likes being teased on some level, or likes being mocked for the kind of neurosis. I was listening to an interview today with Moffat where he was poking fun at himself as this kind of Guardian reader stereotype of, you know, I love complaining, and I've also found I spontaneously become experts in things just so I can complain about how they're being handled. Like,
so if a murderer turned up at your door, you'd be hard pressed to turn them away, would you? You'd have sort of Jeffrey Dahmer in your spare room.
Listen, I would have no problem in getting my wife to say.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that page, definitely.
Reese's character Peter, he loves also being cross about things. Do you like? I mean, are you someone who just sort of loves getting riled up at the news?
Yes, I'm constantly complaining about things that I can't remember fully. And I've noticed that, like a lot of people, I've become an expert in so many things recently.
Isn't it funny?
I'm an epidemiologist right here and an economist at the same time. Previously, I knew nothing about that. But then suddenly, I knew everything about viruses, how they spread, and how it might affect the economy. I marvelled at the insight coming out of my mouth as I complained about how everybody wasn't doing exactly what I had just thought of.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes.
It's that kind of I wish to hurt myself kind of thing. I wish I'm learning about this on some level so I can get more annoyed about seeing how people mishandling it. But it's also that kind of British shame thing of, you know, I a Guardian reader, I want to be poked fun at as being like a Guardian reader. There's some complex thing to do with shame and almost kind of domination, I think, in some of these stereotypes. And I think it's a running theme with a lot of this kind of vein of Moffat characters, with Steve coupling, Peter in the Unfriend. There's a whole range you can pick from, which are these similarly kind of neurotic, often in a neurotic relationship where they're kind of very dominated by the woman, at least in the kind of domestic, in like the social domestic setting. yeah, I don't know. Any response to what I'm kicking around there?
Yeah, it's not just whining as an identity, but also being in love with the fact that whining is your identity. I think you can describe a lot of British people that way. Maybe certainly of maybe sort of petty bourgeois or kind of middle class kind of British people who may be lacking any sort of national identity beyond being whiny and sort of complaining a lot. And so they sort of become obsessed with that as some sort of like marker of authenticity or being specialness. Or like, oh God, yes, we're British. We love to complain about things. And I mean, it's bollocks, but you know, it's just it's people needing something to cling to, I guess, to cohere their fragile identities. That's my soapbox.
Yeah. Tyler, any thoughts on that before I say something else?
No, I think Gig worded it perfectly.
I think this bit's important to mention. Moffat didn't just stumble into the play world because he's like, hey, I've completed TV. Like I've leveled up all the way. I've done everything. Now I want to do the next thing. He's always wanted to do plays. In fact, he's characterized as he was meant to do plays. And then, of course, Press Gang kind of happened by accident, if you know the story of how that happened. It's a really bizarre scenario involving religion and his father and a bunch of coincidences and nepotism and whatnot that suddenly made him a showrunner incredibly early and in an unlikely way. And then Press Gang was really, really good. And it led on to something even better, and Joking Apart and so on and so on. His career did all sorts of things. So he kind of stumbled into TV, and he kind of characterizes it as he stayed in there because of inertia. Like they kept giving him money to make more things. And eventually, of course, he got a play in the IP land. And of course, he was going to stick around there for a while. But you could almost characterize his TV career as a diversion in a way, because he wanted to do plays originally.
I originally, when I was very, very young, which you can't see me on a podcast, I'm not anymore. That's what I wanted to be, was a playwright. I wanted to write plays. And then I sort of fell into television and accidentally got paid quite well. So I thought I just stayed there for, 30 odd years. The way you do when someone hands you a check.
Yeah.
When Peter, the real Peter, whose name is Peter, told me this story, the moment you hear that story, that's a play, isn't it? I very, very much wanted to be a playwright when I was young. What happened in my case, and it's not a very instructive story, is that there used to be an old religious program called Highway, presented by Harry Seacombe, was one of the goons back in the day, and he went to my dad's primary school, where my dad was a headmaster. He said, I've got this idea for a children's TV show. The producer of Highway's girlfriend, Sandra Hasty, came back to the school and said, look, I'd like to develop your idea of a children's newspaper. And my dad said, okay, but only if my son is allowed to write a script for it. They really loved the script. And so I ended up actually writing Press Gang, which was the show that resulted from that. So that's how I began. That's how you do it. You get a religious broadcaster to come to your father's place of work. I'm not sure how much advice is useful in that.
This is something he actually wanted to do, basically. This isn't a checker box for I want to do all the writer things. This is something he's passionate about. And he also says the reason this is a play specifically is when his Peter and Debbie friends told him about this, he didn't think like TV or film or whatever, because
you somehow, if you did it as a TV thing or a movie, you'd have to see the other bits outside the house.
Yeah.
You'd have to see Elsa on the boat. You'd have to
have
know
flashbacks, wouldn't you, to actually her crimes?
Because that's what the slight literalism of television does that. But
God, I can even see the Netflix version in my head already.
Isn't it depressing? It's just you'd have too much.
Yeah.
Whereas just by for the most part in the play, you just see the living room. And you don't have to account for that when you're doing a play. You don't have to explain that. If I was doing the TV version, then I'd have to account for the fact we never leave that room. You just see that slice and you only get a sidelong glance at Elsa or indeed Peter and Debbie. And I think that was just right for that.
Why write it for the stage and not for the place where you've made such a name for yourself on TV?
It just felt like a play is one reason. It felt like that. And I think it is that. Because the nice thing about a play is you sort of confine it to one place quite easily without having to explain. If you can view the television version, you have to go and see her or what she does when she's not in the house. Somehow just that contained feeling felt right. Also, I'd been sort of desperate to do a play because I had spent 33 years or something doing exactly the same thing all the time.
It's a play, isn't it? Like intuitively, this feels like a play story. I think because it's a one-room kind of story. Really, isn't it? Apart from a few little bits, you don't want to be seeing the flashbacks. You don't want to see how Elsa did this. You don't want to see the whole story of the family. I think the comedy is in the tension, the kind of Fawlty Towers trying to cope. It's in the very tense in the moment. You don't want to move out of the scene, basically. You want a very real-time experience, I think, with this sort of story, because the humor of it is in the moment tension. This makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know if you guys agree, but I see exactly get what he means. This is a play, this story.
Absolutely. It's about the characters being trapped in that house with that woman, isn't it? So, and that sense of having the audience also trapped, in a sense, in the theatre with the characters is kind of part of the point. That's how you have to cook the room, as a certain playwright I knew once put it. It's about that tension in the air that the audience is sharing.
It's not a series, it's a single episode of a sitcom. You could definitely do this on TV if it were part of a grander whole with other ideas that were similar to this, maybe that also took place in the house or also took place in other houses or other parts of London, but you couldn't do a whole series of this. It did remind me actually of a couple of his Joking Apart episodes, in that some of those took place just in one house or in one flat. So in that sense, in the setting sense, in like the confined running about between set pieces within the house, and that kind of thing. It reminded me of some episodes of his early sitcom work.
With the Unfriend, this is an aspect we haven't really talked about. We talked a bit about the shame aspect of it, and a bit about is it deep or is it just for fun and laughs. But the thing that really surprised me, and I really dislike bathroom humor. I have like a weird aversion to it. Like, I will leave rooms in an awkward way, like if conversations get about it. It's just, maybe you guys aren't as weird as me, but you may have like something you just can't stand hearing about, that you'll exit scenarios in weird ways just because it is really off-putting to you. That's me a lot of the time with bathroom type of stuff. Don't psychoanalyze me why. I don't want to be psychoanalyzed about it. I don't know why, but I've always been like that since I was a kid. And so kindly, our friend Katz flagged up to me, hey, there's something about the play you probably want to know before you read it. And I said, lay it on me. And he told me it's quite scatological, much more so than any other work that Katz has seen, Steven Moffat has done, and he's seen a bunch himself. And so I was like, thank you, that does actually help me to prime myself that that's going to be a big part of it. It wasn't as bad as I thought for me. It was, because it's basically, most of that aspect of it is there's kind of an extended running gag about flatulence with the son, which I found deeply unfunny. But perhaps this is because of my aversion. But I found it a very weak gag, and I didn't like the Elsa resolution of, oh, I'm going to psychoanalyze you about this, and it's actually blah, 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 and then we're all happy families. Wasn't a fan of that, but maybe I was predisposed not to be. That's the kind of minor aspect of bathroom humor in the play. The big aspect of it, and I think it is kind of successful, even to me, is that kind of big set piece Tyler was talking about, the kind of Stuart Lee-esque, we're going to stew in this for ages, and we're going to come out the other side of it because we're extending it so long, which is the policeman is in the bathroom, and we think he's been poisoned by Elsa. This actually relates to one of the differences between the two script books. Get into that in a little bit later, because that's actually a little different, that sequence between the earlier and the later script book. Policeman's in the bathroom, thinks he's been poisoned, and there's this extended thing of like, Peter needs to check if the policeman's been poisoned. And so basically it comes to Peter wants to inspect the what's going on in there. He needs to poke around to check that things are okay. And so there's, a lot of the kind of tense, fast kind of humor between them in that. Unless I'm forgetting anything, those are the two big bathroom strands in the play. What do we think of those? But also, what do we, like, I haven't really noticed Moffat do this before. So what do you think the deal is there?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because he's not uncomfortable with writing sexual innuendo and all of that kind of thing. But I don't recall any instance of him ever doing bathroom humour, toilet humour. But it was such like a centerpiece of the play. It was like the big thing that sticks out in my head was that long bathroom scene that I did quite enjoy. I can't imagine I'd have, like I said, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. In fact, I know I wouldn't if I'd read it. But watching it, I can say it was a funny scene. It was well done. I liked I liked it. It was good.
The "you're a busy man" part of it, I think, was good because that pays off an earlier running gag, in an unexpected way. Like, that's comedy. Like, I thought that was good. That bit, it's just the sheer absurdity of what Peter is framing there, that you don't have time to flush the toilet because you're a busy police officer. Like, that's funny. It's just so absurd, and it links into an earlier gag. I thought that was good. But the idea in general, it's sort of baffling. I've just never seen this side of Moffat before, I suppose.
I suppose it's almost like there is a quite a relative lack of sexual humour and stuff in this play for Moffat, given how much sex is such a big thing for Moffat. So it's almost like in moving to a different sort of setting or a general topic area, Moffat needs something else, some other bodily function to fixate on. I think the toilet stuff, particularly with the blood and bowel movements, I'd say it's more successful than the flatulent stuff, just because it's linked to the poison aspect, and there's an element of threat and danger, and the characters are actually, and again, it's the character's own, it's Peter's own politeness that's sort of freaking him out here and putting him in the jam. It's directly tied to the main thrust of the story, whereas the stuff about his son farting a lot is just, it's not serving much of a purpose, really. It just feels like it feels kind of redundant.
Is this just a play about the bathroom and crazy Americans voting for Donald Trump? Or is it a play, is there loftier ambitions here? Or are there unwittingly themes that hook deeper in? The things I kind of see swirl around just from, Gatiss and Moffat and interviewers and whatnot talking to them are like the nature of being British, the idea of British shame that we've talked about. In a pre-show interview with Gatiss talked about this idea that forces for bad can accidentally be forces for good, which I thought was delicious. If you try and apply that to some of the politics around the play, that try to unpack what exactly is being said there is pretty fascinating.
I think it is quietly rather moving. Yeah. But then that's not what the play's about. It is just extremely funny, but it is about other stuff. It just doesn't have to sort of.
But it's about love.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
And it's also about love and change, and also about being British, and I think about how someone like Elsa, who is a force for bad, can accidentally be a force for good. So I think that's rather lovely, and it doesn't have to be this is a profound message, but it is there.
That's more ties into the murder thing, I guess. But basically, I think the weird undercurrent there is like Elsa is like this tornado that ends up. She's very she's evil. She's a murderer, and she's a Trump voter and a very brash American and all these things. And yet she enhances the life of this British family, and she's generally a force for. She's not just a force for good. She's also a force for kind of cutting through red tape, in the sense that killing the neighbour at the end is a pretty. Well, no, am I? Is it such a bad thing? Sure, ethically, but also it resolves some issues, and he was awfully irritating throughout the play. Certainly reading it.
I would say it also creates some new issues. They have a corpse in their house now.
Yeah, I suppose. But do you get what I mean with the whole murder? I'm not saying justifying, but sort of the weird merit of the murder here.
Yeah, I think Moffat might agree with you. I think, judging by his last couple of pieces of work, I think he has. There are long tirades in both of his recent works about why is murder so bad? Why don't I get to murder people? Yes.
The mind races trying to unpack why this has suddenly become quite a large theme in his work as of, I guess, 2020-ish onwards. But I think it amused me listening to that interview with Gatiss talking about this theme of the play potentially being, a force for bad can accidentally be a great force for good, just because, politically, that's very fun to unpack in the play. I'm basically saying, does the play subtextually say basically that actually Donald Trump was a lovely whirlwind that, shook up America in a good way? Because I feel like that's basically what Elsa is here. She does the Donald Trump-esque thing of, ostensibly or supposedly cutting through red tape and just saying it like it is, and, just dealing with something front on, as I'm not talking at all about the truth of anything. I'm just talking about the general kind of way these figures are conceived of and whatnot. That, and also that, she's clearly a malicious force, a malevolent force. She's a killer. But this kind of family, however you want to categorize them in terms of class and whatnot, benefit from this kind of malevolence, basically. And she energizes them, which I think is a huge piece of the puzzle when it comes to the certain types of people that might be super energized by, you know, figures like that. It's, you know, I'm not just a so-and-so. I'm all pumped up. This crazy malevolent figure has, you know, reasserted my identity and made me feel like a man and made us feel like a nuclear family again and everything. Am I crazy? Do you guys get the kind of reading I'm playfully throwing around here?
Yeah, I do. I didn't expect to come on here and psychoanalyse Moff's politics, but since we're on the topic, I think that Steven Moffat's quite inclined to conservatism.
That reminds me of an interview Moffat had recently-ish. It was at the start of not recently, the start of 2020-21. It feels recent because it was connected to the Unfriend press run, sort of, in that it was talking about how the Unfriend will return eventually and so on. Anyway, there's a Thatcher mention in it because...
Yeah, I was about to mention that. That's right. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I've got it here. So he's asked about TV shows that have changed his life, TV shows he likes, and that sort of thing. One of the questions is like a TV show that changed your mind. And Moffat says, I grew up with and have retained a deep loathing of Margaret Thatcher. I couldn't stand her voice. I couldn't stand what she stood for, anything. But I did watch the BBC documentary Thatcher, A Very British Revolution. And for the first time, I get it. I don't necessarily approve of it all, but I get why it's not all wrong. So that changed my mind a bit. I still find I shrink in revulsion if I hear her voice, but she was smart and she was right about a number of things, even if she wasn't always very pleasant. I wouldn't exactly vote for her, but at long last, I understand why other people would. Damn you, BBC. I think what we're talking about here in the play and how it invokes Donald Trump and that interview talking about Margaret Thatcher and also the Frances Barber character herself in the play, I think there's a very decidedly intangible aspect to all the politics here where there's nothing specific about Thatcher, as you know, mentioned in that interview. I haven't seen the documentary Moffat talks about, so I don't know what it gets into, but there's nothing specific there about what choices actually were smart or whatever. I'm not saying he needed to go into specifics. I'm just saying this kind of this intangible air. In the play, Donald Trump is invoked, not in terms of specifics or whatever he did, because I guess that would bring a specific quality to the play that probably wouldn't play into the humour and the audience kind of approval of it. And I think the way the Frances Barber character is used in the play, it's just as this kind of energizing, oh, she is bad and she shakes things up, but, you know, that energizes people, it gets them out of the rut or whatever. And that's, I know how Donald Trump is characterized in positive and negative ways, depending on the person in this way. It's that he incited or he energized, you know, a certain class of people who then felt, oh, I can do this or I'm going to do this or whatever. And that's how I think the Frances Barber character works. It's like, I know it's a trope I don't think you like, Tyler, because you were complaining about it to me in that Nobody Bob Odenkirk movie lately, where it's like, oh, the guy's masculinity is repressed by the domestic lifestyle. But then a scenario arises where, you know, someone energizes him or a situation energizes him and then his masculinity breaks free again and he's a man again. I think that's the kind of characterization of Frances Barber's character here. And I think that's how Trump is characterized by lots of publics. So I think that's a weird kind of parallel in some ways. And it's just a very intangible sense of politics and a much more psychological sense of it, I think, is what Moffat deals with for good or for ill. And I think that's keeping it within like the scope of the discussion of this play in particular, rather than trying to get more expansive with that.
Well, the way it came off to me, the play, it strikes me that in writing about these liberal Guardian readers who are too polite to turn away this murderer and ultimately make themselves okay with the presence of a murderer and the fact of, you know, this brutality, it strikes me that Moffat is writing about what, in a way, Elsa is almost pandering to them, to the Lindals. I think that what you've described, the way that she kind of energizes their life and makes their kids happy again and gets them all working together as a family, I think there's a degree to which, in playing up the way Elsa does, she almost gives the Lindals an opportunity to be nice to her in a way. I think an important contrast is that even though the Lindals are so obsessed with not being seen as, you know, rude or anything, they are nonetheless incredibly rude to the neighbour. Even though they don't necessarily think that they are being, but, you know, they are incredibly fucking rude about the neighbour. So their niceness is conditional. It's not actually chronic, it is conditional. I think because the neighbour, he's passive-aggressive to them, you know, he's not one of them, he doesn't, you know, he's a separate, there's a dividing line between him and the Lindals. He is not recipient of their chronic niceness. Whereas Elsa, because she is such this huge character and she, you know, puts on these displays of emotion and so passionate, and, you know, and she, in that scene where the Lindels are trying to get rid of Elsa, but they say things like, oh, I'm not making any presumptions, not making any judgments, and Elsa latches onto that, saying, oh, thank you for not judging me, oh, you're so kind, you're so wonderful, and because of that, the Lindels are unable to actually get rid of her the way they want to. I think, to a certain degree, there's something reciprocal there. I think Elsa is giving them something, these liberals, these centrists, almost the presence of this incredibly violent and kind of dark and dangerous figure is nonetheless, but because she's pandering to them in a way, they're able to make themselves fine with her presence. And I think that whole big monologue that Debbie has in the second act, where she storms in, she's like, oh, pretty soon we'll end up voting for her. Very subtextual there, Moffat. I think that whole thing is sort of identifying a tendency within liberals to kind of make themselves okay with political figures, certainly, who represents incredibly violent and dangerous tendencies. And the fact that Debbie expresses those violent tendencies herself, the fact that she talks about, hey, why can't I kill people? The thing is, it's not actually a normal urge to want to murder everyone around you. And I think Moffat is probably keenly aware of that, even in a self-deprecating way. I think when he writes a character talking about how it's not fair that I don't get to murder everyone, I think he's probably needling that kind of tendency a bit as well, because I think that sense of hypocrisy, the way in which the supposedly cuddly, very nice sort of Guardian reader type person actually has that urge for, murder and violence and sadism within them, and that is why they are ultimately okay with like a figure like Elsa, and why they're ultimately okay with, leaning right or leaning towards like these horrible policies and dangerous things. I think Moffat is trying to sort of waddle his way towards a general identification of that phenomenon.
I think what you're saying there is it's kind of a cynical class solidarity type thing, isn't it? It's a we're not so different, you and I, or maybe just we're of mutual benefit to each other kind of thing. The Trump-coded Elsa figure is good for the middle class family of Peter and Debbie and the kids. She's good for them basically. Look at the son's kind of weird racial comments, and which Elsa eggs on, and the play just kind of plays with both of them. The Polish Mexican thing. I'm not making a big deal about it. It's just kind of interesting to add into this kind of mix where that Elsa and the son both do that. And we're all meant to laugh at that. And it's funny that he can't tell the difference between Polish people and Mexicans, and he mixes it all up and whatnot. To look at this family of Guardian readers, the first instinct is, they're so progressive and whatnot, and they're being assailed by this Trump voter. It's, it's oil and water, and never the twain can meet kind of thing. But actually, I think what Gig is kind of playing around with there is, well, no, they actually go together quite well, really, don't they? As, kind of some of Debbie's lines kind of say. They both have this kind of compulsion to murder in a way. Trump, Elsa, is the one that actually kind of does these things. What's that years and years quote about? Emma Thompson has a quote where someone is purported to have said something they didn't actually say, and then she says, well, they did actually do these things or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
He didn't really say those things, but he did really say them, didn't he? Yeah.
There was a scene where there was a deep fake Corbyn. Yeah, it was that. There was a deep fake Corbyn and a caricature type thing, and she said, oh, well, it's terrible that they're doing this now, but realistically, he did say all of that, didn't he?
Yeah. So I think there's a tacit kind of approval of Elsa within the Peter Debbie family in a way, in that she is a good thing for them, ultimately. She improves the children's development. She improves the family overall. She makes them more of a conventional family, I guess, in a way. They start bonding more and being more of a nuclear family and everything. She gets rid of that nasty little problem of the neighbour. And the neighbour is he's annoying, but he's kind of the good guy, basically, in this, if you ask me anyway. What has he really done wrong? He's a passive-aggressive guy. He's anti-alcohol, I guess. But he's just got a regular little garden issue he needs solving. And I know it can be annoying for a neighbour to nag at you about this, but it would have taken Peter nothing to actually deal with it. I know we'll probably talk in a bit about the interesting memory proofness of, how the neighbour is written. But basically, I think he's a normal guy, really, that just needs a very quick thing solved. And he's such a frustrating character because that's kind of the position Peter has put him in. Peter could resolve this very easily. I'm not saying the neighbour isn't annoying, because he is, but he doesn't deserve to be murdered. Yet, if things don't go pear-shaped, to do with the investigation or whatever at the end, him being murdered would be a good thing for the family, basically. They clearly don't care about him or like him. Him being out of the way will rid Peter of a problem. So basically, I think Elsa is just a big positive for the family. And I think it's not so much a left versus right thing with the family, so much as it's interesting that this kind of figure like Elsa actually improves things for them, basically, and actually melds with them quite well. That is the interesting sort of political reading, I guess.
Just to briefly connect all the Elsa and Debbie and kind of murder stuff to something else Moffat has written. You recall the line, give a good man firepower and he'll never run out of people to kill. I think that line from Doctor Who is kind of identifying something in Moffat's writing, whereby he's aware, I think, of the tendency of people who think themselves to be, good and nice to nonetheless have that murderous impulse within them. They can justify incredible brutality and violence almost, and I think he is not uncritical of that tendency. I think it is the key. It is why I bring up that line, because I think that's kind of a flagging that up.
Yeah,
that when he writes about this kind of thing, he is more than aware of the way in which the way in which a violent figure like Elsa might have an appeal, a draw to people who consider themselves, normal and in the centre and well balanced. And that's not necessarily like a good thing that he endorses. It's something that is kind of a contradiction, I think, to Moffat.
I don't think the play is necessarily meant to be cynical in kind of the way I'm proposing. And like in this interview I'm pulling from, Gator says it's quietly rather moving on this talk about how it's about love and change and transformation and whatnot. But I do think, like Gig is saying, this is the kind of stuff Moffat writes in his work, in lots of different ways. So I think it is being played with there. This idea that, the bad figure is actually good for the supposed good guys, and that's kind of fascinating.
Gig, you mentioned that line earlier, that line, we'll end up voting for her. That didn't get a response. Nobody engaged with that. The Metropolitan Liberal elite of London didn't respond to that. I laughed. I found it quite funny, but then I noticed that I was the only one that I heard laughing. I didn't hear any other reaction to that. So nobody responded to that kind of milquetoast self-awareness line. That night, at least.
I mean, I wondered if it was because the Trump stuff is it's so self-evident, but almost flagging it up like that and making it about, hey, voting for her, Trump, Boris, politicians. It's almost like maybe it was just too obvious that it just got no reaction, because it was like, well, yeah, it's self-evident, we get it. Yeah, it's about political figures.
It's also, it's kind of bubbling up in the text too much, I think. It's not the kind of Sherlock is about solving crimes, Unfriend is about policemen in the toilet kind of thing. It's too self-evidently about something, I guess, that line, which it might not play for the,
Another line that I think does that same sort of thing is near the end. When Elsa's about to leave and she's sort of saying, do you really think I'm a murderer? I think she says something about, hey, forget the facts, just focus on your lived experience. And those exact words are used, and that's extremely on the nose. I think the whole reminds me of back in 2016 when everyone was going on and on about post-truth and how everyone's rejecting the facts in favour of and lived experience is obviously a term that has got a lot of use in sort of discourse, and Moffat is turning it into a cynical way here, and I think he's just that sequence is really egging on this idea of Elsa as one of these figures who just gets people to believe what they want rather than the reality, I guess. That
exchange is Elsa saying, do I act like a murderer? Debbie says, no, but well. Elsa says, no, but you read it somewhere. No, but if it says so online, it must be true. Debbie, wake up. You know me. You've met me. Never mind the facts. What's your lived experience? What have you seen? What have you felt? Does nothing you see and hear for yourself matter? If the facts say different? Honey, listen to me. What's right in front of you might not be the whole truth. It might not be the truth you were looking for. But I'll tell you something, it's your truth.
That line coming from Frances Barber made me really uncomfortable, knowing that she reposts a lot of transphobic stuff on Twitter. So listening to that come from her was really uncomfortable. Listening to it kind of come from a Moffat script was also quite uncomfortable. It reminded me a bit. I mean, I don't think it's half as bad. But it reminded me a bit of, you guys did recently, like a couple of months ago, you did a podcast on Johnny Morris, the Doctor Who writer who did Flip Flop.
Yeah, that was one of our Christmas ones.
The Big Finish audio. And it reminded me of that. It reminded me of like the like malicious drawing on like liberal and left-wing terms and like terminologies and things to like there was, I mean, that's a whole thing. That's a thing about, the thing about Jews and the media, and it's pretty gross. So this is not half as bad as that was, but it did make me writhe a little bit in the theatre. Yeah,
murder is the big idea of the play, isn't it? But I want to turn the clocks back a little, true Steven Moffat style, because reading the play and seeing it engage with murder so much in a lot of these Debbie and Elsa exchanges we'll get more into, this was so separated from his last major work, which was Inside Man, the quite successful BBC Netflix series. So there's talk of a second series, happening. So it did better than The Time Traveler's Wife, which I loved. I think it was the best thing Moffat has done. Well, I thought Dracula was quite good too. But best thing he's done, I liked it more than Dracula. Best thing he's done since Doctor Who for me, The Time Traveler's Wife. But it got cancelled. So although it ends in a good way, like it ends in a good closure way, and you can always read the second half of the book if you want more. It pains me that we did not get a second series of that. But Inside Man, series 2 is... I don't know if you could just hear a bunch of thunder crackling, but that's the omen for how much I dislike Inside Man. Inside Man may be getting a series 2. And Inside Man also, it has a similar kind of thing of, we're Guardian readers and we're normal. Are we? We're actually a bit twisted. The Unfriend doesn't really go into the twisted thing so much. It's just kind of Elsa benefiting the Peter and Debbie family, makes you think, at least in our conversation. Inside Man is much more straightforwardly about these people look normal, but man, they're actually pretty twisted when it comes down to it. Does that mean that we're all twisted inside, or is it just like a Breaking Bad type thing of, this guy seemed normal, but actually put him in the right scenario and you'll see he was twisted inside all along? Inside Man plays with that more. But a lot of Inside Man deals with this idea of murder in a kind of twee way, or in a why not commit a murder? Murder can solve all this kind of stuff for you kind of thing. Can you guys speak to that at all? I'm drawing connections between Inside Man and Unfriend and murder here.
There is a particular similarity in how Moffat suddenly developed this thing of, what if a domestic married couple, with a kid, and who had lots of bickering and who seemed to have this normal life, nonetheless suddenly found their life intruded into by a stranger, and by the prospect of basically murder, people dying, and the question of pragmatism, like how far would they actually go when it comes to issues like protecting their kids, from all kinds of things. So it's a set of obsessions for Moffat, and obviously he is a writer who reuses things a ton. He's been doing that his whole career. So it's not a surprise to see ideas pop up again, maybe not always in quite this quick succession. But I think I guess it's just another lens on his eternal theme of marriage, because in this play there's another line where someone says the line, it's slow chicken, marriage in other words. And Moffat likes coming up with little aphorisms for what marriage means to him, and that's another one of those. So I guess in terms of looking for things that will introduce conflict into this seemingly normal marriage, I guess murder is the one that's on his mind at the moment. The idea of, would you actually kill someone? Does being a parent and a married couple in that kind of middle-class environment put you in a position where you could consider murder, or where murder maybe becomes almost attractive to you?
I think The Unfriend has a lot of stuff like, murder would solve all these things and murder is really convenient. And the first episode of Inside Man had the Jefferson Grief character, the murderer, say, everyone is a murderer, you just have to meet the right person, which is a kind of similar idea. And then the second episode of Inside Man had the woman, wife, mother figure talk about, we're meant to be this great murderous species, but, why is there no webpage explaining how you kill someone? And this big whole, domesticity, it's hard to murder people, and what do we do? Kind of twee playing with murder thing that I think The Unfriend kind of does a similar thing tonally with how it's dealing with murder. I wonder why this has suddenly become a theme in Moffat's work. Murder is rarely an expression of indifference, Inside Man says as well. Morality lessons from a murderer is questioned in Inside Man, and that's kind of what The Unfriend does as well, because Elsa is a murderer, yet she galvanizes and energizes and improves the family of the play. Everyone's a murderer, all it takes is a good reason and a bad day. And Elsa kind of dismisses and rationalizes her murder in kind of cutesy ways. What's going on?
Yeah, Elsa says she's like improving the human race, isn't she? In her whole self-justifying speech at the end, she says, don't you think the human race can be improved? That I just started my mission to make the world a better place by eliminating some people. And, that's...
Tyler, what do you think?
I don't know. It's funny, isn't it? Because it's the Unfriend coming right, seeing The Unfriend coming right off the back of seeing and talking about Inside Man is quite interesting because it carries over a lot of the same themes, a lot of the same ideas about what murder could be, a lot of the same diatribes about murder and whether it's good or bad, and why can't I do murder if other people do murder and get away with it? Why can't I? Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know what exactly about murder has taken to Steven Moffat all of a sudden since around 2019, I guess, when he was writing these two things. But here we are. This is what he's doing now. He's a murder. I don't know. What would you? It's a murder enjoyer.
Connoisseur.
Yeah.
I suppose, if anything, another kind of parallel and connection between the two is that you have the central couple who are essentially repressing things. I guess this domesticity, this environment, is one in which there's a lot of repression going on. There's a lot of focus on outward appearances, politeness, normalness, appearances of normalcy, and within that repression, I guess urges or twisted urges or thoughts bubble up. I guess he's almost depicting the marriage as an environment that is barely restraining or repressing these violent impulses, or these impulses towards killing. I mean, Debbie has that whole monologue where she talks about, I've spent my life very specifically not killing certain people because I have such rage inside me, but I have to suppress it. I have to act nice and normal and fine. So it's almost like the more nice and normal this married couple appears to be, the more dangerous they actually are to themselves or others. I guess the more there is bursting to get out.
That Debbie, those lines reminded me. Episode 4 of Inside Man is Mary say a line. From memory, it's something like, how does anyone ever become a murderer? There's so much admin, which feels in a similar vein to me. And also, episode 4 of Inside Man is Jefferson Grief say, and I hate at the start of this reminds me of the beautiful listen, fear, companion speech. But Jefferson Grief says, there are moments that make murderers of us all. We're not freaks in cages to be stared at and judged and written about as though we're a breed apart, where anyone on a bad day, cracks can open in the most ordinary life and swallow anyone at all. No one is safe from the worst that they can do. He talks more about murder. Yeah, and it just feels so akin to this play to me. They feel very linked. It's not the first time Moffat has done this. Joking apart and coupling feel like sister shows to me in lots of ways, not least of which they're autobiographical, which I certainly hope the murder-focused shows aren't. But, they deal with a lot of the same themes and they kind of spin them in different ways, but related ways. And I guess Inside Man and Unfriend kind of do that with repression, like Gig is saying, and murder, like Tyler is saying, and these ideas of like domesticity and we've got to behave and we've got to be normal, but murder is the animal instinct that we want to come out. And that was something the sex comedies of Moffat, especially coupling, dealt with a lot as well. Like, we're animals inside, especially men, and we just want the animal stuff to come out, but we've got to restrain ourselves and sit on the cushions. And I guess that's also... It's not... Peter doesn't become a murderer in the play, but there's a kind of murder by proxy done because of Peter, because the neighbour is partially killed, I think, as a kindness from Elsa to help Peter out. It was kind of the way I read that. I don't know if you guys saw it that way.
Well, we do see Elsa, she's the first one who calls out the neighbour's passive aggressiveness, specifically. She's the one who, she is very vocally annoyed by the neighbour. So in a sense, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a kindness to Peter. Elsa really hates the neighbour, but obviously Peter hates him too, and she knows that. Like, they both share their dislike of Peter. So there is something almost complicit in the way in which Peter essentially allows, he knows she is a poisoner. He has allowed her to stay in their house. So, the neighbour's death is kind of on Peter. Like, the same way that if she'd poisoned the policeman, like, the same thing, it would have been the same thing. Listening to you talk about all those things that Moffat's been bringing up, I wonder if this turn towards murder is also something to do with mortality. I wonder if mortality in particular, because obviously it's not a new thing for artists later in their career to get more of a fixation on mortality in particular. And I'd say maybe it's becoming more of a thing with Moff, maybe rather than just sex, maybe just the thoughts about death in particular and becoming more morbid as we get further on in his writing career. Maybe that's just what's happening. Maybe just death is on his mind more, different kinds of death. And there are points in this play that feel like Moff could be writing about his own feelings about his mother who passed away recently. Peter has that whole thing about how he's using his mother as an excuse, and Elsa tells him at the end, you can change every day between now and when she leaves you. So, go and be with her. That feels almost Moffat writing to his past self almost. So I just feel these ideas of mortality are bubbling up in Moffat's work more as time goes on.
Yeah, he's a very autobiographical writer in lots of ways. Like these characters like Peter or Mark in Joking Apart or Steven. Yeah, certainly Steven Coupling, who, like Peter in Unfriend, is named after the person they're based on. They're blatantly, openly, directly, by Moffat's own words, autobiographical. So I think all that's fair. Yeah.
I think the other thing that he's becoming more and more interested in as he grows old, and he always has been, but more so in Inside Man and The Unfriend than ever before, is upper middle class domesticity. In both of those, in both Inside Man and The Unfriend, we've seen lots of really nice big houses with nuclear families and middle class guardian reading couples, and how would they deal with scenarios that impinge on their nice, normal, middle-class London lifestyle.
I guess that's got to be something to do with Moffat's own circumstances, I guess. Like, the more time he spends and the more used he becomes to his life as he has it now, this lovely life, this lovely wife, family, kids, I guess that whereas maybe in the past he's had this tumultuous, love life and tumultuous all kinds of things going on. I guess as he becomes more fixed into this stable nuclear family of his own, that becomes his sphere and that becomes more of the focus of his own writing.
There was an interview recently where basically the interviewers are asking him, like, what can you used to put past stuff into your work, what can you put now? Like, what are you going to draw from your life? And he's just saying, I've got it good. Like, what's going to be that interesting? Oh, the man is 60 and he's thinking, my family's good, but I feel a bit old. Like, there's nothing there to write about. Basically, he says. He hasn't got an interesting... Not like in the coupling days where there was actually interesting things in his life happening that he could write about. Now it's just like, things are good and I'm getting old. That's, pretty well-trodden ground.
Stephen, you've lent into your own life a lot for your work. So Press Gang as a student, Chalk, your time as a teacher, Joking Apart, about the breakup of your first marriage, Coupling, about falling in love again.
Yeah.
What would the drama of a super successful man of your age now be about and look like?
Or just a man on a sofa eating, I think, wouldn't it? I mean, it'd probably be something like that. I don't think there's been a show about a showrunner. Probably because it would just be boring.
But a serious question,
Okay.
What would be the stories that you would want to tell about a man of your age?
A man of my age? I don't know. I haven't a clue because I don't even know that I'm typical of men of my age. Do you know, I'm not sure what I would say about that. Just probably being generally grumpy and cross with everybody else.
So it's like he needs to inject excitement into that setting, almost. So that's where the murder comes in. So he has this nice life, so he writes about characters whose nice lives are suddenly intruded upon by some burst of danger or violence or threat.
Yeah. With the neighbour, I wanted to ask, I think, Gig, could you compare, do you think there's comparisons to be made between the neighbour and, like, the kind of sensory villains Moffat likes to write, especially in Doctor Who, where there's like a kind of gimmick around perception or, a sensory experience? What do you think?
Well, I think this is a classic case of Moffat reusing an idea. I think possibly it might be the case that all Moffat Doctor Who baddies are eventually just sitcom gags in waiting, because here we explicitly see the term memory proof repurposed from the silence in Doctor Who and applied to the neighbour in this play. And I think because I guess in a sense the game that the silence represent, the idea that if you look away you forget them, that makes for a fun bit of stage theatrical comedy, I guess. It is in a way that kind of game is a form of physical comedy, and he just does it in the comedic way in this play here. So I guess you could almost do something similar with the Weeping Angels, I guess, maybe if you phrased it differently or directed it differently. I think there is, I guess it's just the mechanics of how that character works. I mean, it's not necessarily the most realistic thing, but it's heightened because that's the kind of play this is. That's the kind of genre of comedy this is.
Yeah. I don't know how much we're expected to identify with the neighbour, but I really hated Peter when he was ignoring him. I know the neighbour is annoying, but, like, come on, you're not as much of a busy man as you make out. You certainly have time to... It's not even like the neighbour's quest is that important. Like, eventually Elsa actually looks into it and is like, well, this is, not actually that big of a deal. And, I'm not sure how much Peter really should be contributing financially to what you're saying here. Like, it's not like he is like a noble quest. It's just kind of the basic humanity of, could you spare, like, 20 seconds and just kind of resolve things in a normal human way, Peter? And he just can't. it really made me dislike Peter.
I think they build up a lot that the Lindels are kind of inconsiderate towards their neighbours, like, generally. I mean, the whole thing about them making loads of noise at all hours, having incredibly rowdy wine evenings and constant electric guitar noise. I think generally the sense that this suburban kind of environment is one in which these different units of these different family units are basically annoying each other and almost in opposition to each other. And the way in which living an incredibly self-absorbed lifestyle puts you at odds with the people around you, I suppose. So the life of luxury and fun that Peter and Debbie are always having is one that the families around them, like the neighbour, there is implicit resentment there. And I guess a lack of engagement. They're such separated units. They don't feel like a community. They feel like competing units. And also, just to add to that, I guess the way in which Peter feels like he can almost rationalise treating the neighbour with such disrespect because the neighbour is boring, I guess that is another sense, another reflection of the self-absorption, really, because he can't stand to just engage with this boring person for a little bit because he's so in his own head. Peter is so, like, I don't want to say not like narcissistic necessarily, but so obsessed with his own things, his own business. He's so unwilling to actually extend a little bit of his life to someone who just sacrifice a little bit of his time to someone who he feels is not worthy of it.
I think it's worth bringing up the differences between the versions of the play. So there's one version. All right, let's see. So the older version of the script book has the original poster on it, which was shot, like photographed before, like the play didn't actually happen, basically, is what happened. They took the poster, photos, and then COVID and everything, the play didn't go ahead, but the script book was still developed back then.
Doesn't sound like it's changed much from the original idea that you had 3 years ago. Is that right?
No, I mean, we'd got as far as shooting the poster, which every time I see it looks like ancient history. It's the only thing we'd really done. Yeah. And then it was all off. I remember having a Zoom with Daniel, and there was sort of optimistic talk of being on in the autumn.
Oh, that's right.
And just thinking, I can't see it myself, you know.
And so that is a paperback original published in 2022, but prepared in 2020, is my understanding. And then the newer script book is the West End version, which is the current poster on it, and that is from 2023. Like inside it says reprinted with revisions and a new cover in 2023. And so, of course, I was so intrigued. What are these differences? What are these revisions? What could be different between the two versions? This merits two reads. This merits looking through them and unearthing what could have changed, especially because part of my thinking was, well, this was developed pre-COVID, the play. It was written, during Dracula shooting and whatnot. Politically, a lot has changed over time since then. Has any of the Trump stuff been shifted over time? Has this all that been shifted? This was what I was thinking. No, not really. There's 3 changes, and they're all very, very minor. So I don't have a huge, exciting reveal from that. But still, it's interesting things got changed. So I'll read out the 3 things that got changed. First is in Act 2, the big bathroom set piece with the police. In the original script book, what happens is... okay, I'll read it out. So, Elsa says to the neighbour, "Oh, it's my handsome tea partner. I had a look at the photograph you sent. I'm afraid that wall is clearly yours and any repair costs are on you." The neighbour, a good-natured laugh. "Yes, I thought that was probably the case, but one has to try." Elsa, "No hard feelings, I'm sure." The neighbour, "None at all." Elsa, noticing the sandwich plate. "Oh, there's one left." She picks up the sandwich and, happily munching on it, heads into the kitchen, leaving everyone just staring at one another. PC Junkin nods towards the toilet door. PC Junkin, is he all right? The neighbour, he's a busy man. That's the original staging and script. In the revised West End version, the difference is, when Elsa notices the sandwich plate, she still says, "Oh, there's one left," but then there's a little change. So in the stage directions, goes to bite sandwich, has a thought. And then Elsa has some new dialogue. She says, "By the way, Debbie, there was a lot of out-of-date stuff in that fridge. I threw it in the trash. Thank God I checked. I might have poisoned a policeman." Takes a bite, heads out. There's a despairing moan from inside the toilet. PC Junkin, is he all right? The neighbour, he's a busy man. What do you think of that change?
It strikes me as one made to, I guess, just really clarify, I guess, the story beat there, just in terms of really putting a stress on, I guess, the sort of intentional anticlimax of the Elsa eating the sandwich and not being poisoned, and Peter's reaction to that in particular as well. The fact that, Peter just realizes he's completely humiliated himself for no reason. Just to really stress like each individual beat of that story change. So yeah, it's a fairly normal kind of change, I think, to make over a show's run.
Do you think it was just like a functional clarity thing? They were noticing like they weren't getting the right amount of laughs some nights, like on that beat, and were wondering if the audience was fully getting what had happened there or something? Just because like actually adding dialogue there to clarify it makes me wonder, like, was the laugh ratio not correct?
Yeah, maybe they felt, in particular, giving Elsa that line about, I could have poisoned a policeman. I thought maybe they just felt they felt they could milk it a bit more. Maybe just draw it out a little bit more, make it feel less rushed. Perhaps maybe it felt a bit too quick and abrupt in the original.
The next change is different in that it's actually a subtraction rather than an addition. So it comes towards the end of the play when Elsa's leaving. PC Junkins carrying Elsa's bags. Elsa, Dave kindly agreed to give me a ride to the airport because of all your urban violence. Debbie, you have a police escort? Elsa, it's the times we live in, Debbie. A person could get murdered. Heading to the door. Now listen to me, lovely Lindells. Goodbye is the worst word in the world. When I look back, I don't want my last memory of people I love to be them saying goodbye. So you all just stand there and do nothing. Plain nothing. Just look adorable and British, like you're waiting in line, and that'll do Elsa just fine. In the revised West End version, it goes, Debbie, you have a police escort. Elsa, it's the times we live in, Debbie. A person could get murdered. Heading to the door. Now listen to me, lovely Lindells. I don't want to hear any goodbyes. Elsa doesn't like goodbyes. So you all just stand there and do nothing. Plain nothing. Just look adorable and British, like you're waiting in line, and that'll do Elsa just fine. So the change there is getting rid of goodbye is the worst word in the world. When I look back, I don't want my last memory of people I love to be them saying goodbye. And then it just kind of shortens the rest of it.
I think that seems like a change just made for economy, I guess. I think just in the sense the same amount of information is ultimately communicated. I think you get the same amount from her just saying Elsa doesn't like goodbyes. I mean, it's just the same sort of thing. I think it's just a pure case of cutting out some of the fluff.
Yeah.
I think Moff was in writing that original version of the speech. I think Moff was getting very writerly and flowery, and I think maybe they noticed on rehearsing it or playing it, they're just like, "Meh, it doesn't all need to be here. It's awkward. Let's just cut it down. It's too long."
I think the assonance and alliteration in Worst Word in the World is kind of like I stumbled over saying it there. Yeah, it feels a little over-egged or flowery to me. Or maybe awkward to say for Barbara, I don't know, but I get cutting that line.
Yeah, I was going to mention that I think it might have been to do with the way that Barbara plays it. Maybe it might have been to do with pronunciation issues, but I also think that the way that Barbara plays this character naturally is quite. She's very hammy and over the top and overwrought, and everything she does takes ages to say, and she really drags her lines out. So I wonder whether it was in the interest of both economy and pronunciation issues, I think more than anything else, it would be to do with how long-winded it originally was and how I do remember that scene. I do remember her saying goodbye, and that did feel long as it was. So in the revised version, so I can't imagine how much longer it would have been beforehand.
That whole sequence where she's leaving does kind of drag out a bit already, I think, by itself. I mean, it doesn't feel very joke-loaded. She's sort of going through each of the I mean, she's doing her Mary Poppins exit. She's giving her little goodbyes to each of the family members, except maybe Debbie, and it's not necessarily that funny. So I think, trimming it just seems like a good idea in general.
The third and final change is literally the ending of the play. So the last dialogue of the play is same either way. It's Peter talking to the neighbour he doesn't realise is dead about, anyway, brace yourself, you'll have to start making your own tea now. The stage directions in the original version are, he registers that the neighbour isn't replying in any way, frowns, touches the neighbour's shoulder, and the neighbour pitches forward and slams face down on the table, clearly stone dead. Curtain, the end. The stage directions in the revised West End version are, they start the same way. He registers that the neighbour isn't replying in any way, frowns, touches the neighbour's shoulder, and the neighbour pitches forward and slams face down on the table, clearly stone dead. But then there's more in the revised version. And the more is Peter hesitates, steps back out into the living room. There's his family sitting happily on the sofa. How the hell does he break this to them? He opens his mouth to speak. Curtain, the end.
Yeah, I'm curious, Tyler, like that last bit, like, did it play out on stage more or less how Neo describes it there with that last beat of him? Like, how does he tell this to his family? Like, how did it feel, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
I think what it comes down to is Reece Shearsmith is like a seasoned comic actor, so a lot of what he did in this performance was down to physicality. He didn't have to deliver anything. He just had to kind of do physical movements and facial expressions and such. So what happened there was a shift from one half of the stage, which is the kitchen, where he sees the neighbour die or already dead, to back to the living room where all the other characters are on the sofa, laughing, joking, cuddling, and he sort of creeps uncomfortably from the kitchen into the living room and stands ominously behind them in the sofa, and then opens his mouth, and then curtain falls very quickly. So it worked quite effectively, I thought. And I read this morning this earlier version that Neo sent me, and I'm not so convinced that would have worked. I mean, it would have worked fine, because that's like the obvious end of the play is the neighbour dying. But I think Shearsmith's physicality in that final moment was I think that got more laughs. That was more evocative than the actual death. Because I mean, if you were watching, which everybody there was paying attention to the split stage, you already know that he's dead. You already know that he's not moving. He's just got his eyes open. So him actually falling to the table isn't as evocative as Reece Shearsmith standing behind the sofa agape.
Yeah, I think for Moffat writing the first version, okay, the death, it's the end of the play, yeah, okay, curtain there. It makes sense for him maybe writing it down. But I think once you're rehearsing that kind of thing with actors, it's going to be so obvious, like, to the director, to everybody, that you can get so much more out of Peter's reaction and actually physically doing that, even though there are no words. The writer doesn't get to put a bunch of dialogue to react to it, but it's something that will emerge naturally in bringing it to life on stage. So yeah, I totally see how this additional little bit of non-verbal action got added to the end of the play, and I think it's probably a more interesting, more effective ending overall. I think, to be honest, the death of a neighbour, like you say, Tyler, it's so obvious. It's so obviously coming, and it's so in terms of the structure of the play overall, there is something anticlimactic about it, because you've set up that she is a murderer, Elsa's a murderer for so much of this play, and the fact that at the end of the day, the person who gets murdered, I mean, just ending the play with someone who we don't really care about that much being murdered almost doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like that big of a climax, to be honest. So I feel like dropping the curtain on that is almost, I mean, it's like it feels like an anticlimactic ending. It feels like it's just an abrupt ending. Like, is that it? So focusing it back on the Lindals and the shock, embarrassment, the horror, confusion that Peter feels is just so much more sensible of an ending beat for the play, I think.
There's some dialogue in Act 1. I need to hear how the audience reacted. Tyler, when Peter says 6 nightmares, no, but seriously, how do you explain 6 people dying? And Elsa replies, well, I don't want to go pointing any fingers, but they were all vaccinated. How did that go over?
That got a lot of laughter. Yeah, it wasn't any, there was no gasps or anything. That was a well engaged with moment.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we talked about Debbie's. She's a murderer. We're going to vote for her.
There's one little thing in that monologue, maybe, one last little thing. I think Debbie goes on a lot about how nothing makes sense anymore. Ever since that woman showed up, nothing makes sense in our lives anymore. There's a lot of focus on things used to make sense and now they didn't. And that echoes, I think, a lot of rhetoric and sentiment that has surrounded, I guess like liberals and centrists, post 2016, just that whole sort of environment. I think with the ascendance of figures like Trump, for example, you hear a lot of things used to make sense and now it's all been thrown upside down. And that is ultimately a symptom of their own, I guess, their own limited perspective.
Yeah.
But I think the way in which they haven't really seen
Brexit and smartphones and Donald Trump.
what was actually going on. Yeah, Brexit, of course. That's the other thing. That's the British equivalent almost. All the cosy assumptions were upended. I think that's a way in which here, in writing about the Lindels and Elsa, I think Moffat's also trying to channel that sense of liberal confusion, that sense of disorientation that has come from, I guess, the lack of understanding of why these incredibly powerful, charismatic figures and can disrupt things to such a degree. I think the confusion that ultimately comes from not really understanding what was going on in your life beforehand.
2003 made sense, but 2016 didn't, is the thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Do you remember that scene in Years and Years where Danny's like, oh, before 2008, all was normal and
Yeah.
nobody cared about politics and nobody cared about Afghanistan. And, one of the ways that I characterised this to people that hadn't seen or read the play was that it's a play for people that watch shows like Would I Lie to You and Have I Got News for You and all of that kind of thing. The stuff that likes to do political gags about Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and Liz Truss and whatever, but doesn't really say anything. It doesn't really do anything. And to be honest, if anything, it kind of upholds the status quo. I mean, you look at Have I Got News for You in 2012, and Boris Johnson on the show, and yeah, they were ripping on him, but everybody's laughing. Everybody's laughing with him. So I think this is that kind of, and I think that's also why it got such a good response in London. I'd be interested to see how it was responded to in Chichester. I wish I was there.
I think you can draw a line between the inhumanity of Peter not even knowing his neighbour's name with this blinkered kind of, before 2016 everything was fine. What is Aleppo? Where is Yemen? Kind of thing. I think you can draw, it's the same kind of blinkered. Everything was happy in my little world, built on the backs of, I don't like to think about that. But then that dastardly Trump came along and I suddenly saw the face of evil and, everything was changed from then on, the intrusion of evil into the world kind of thing. I think, because it kind of, there's the underlying inhumanity of Peter himself is that he is willfully so blinkered. He casts himself as informed because he reads The Guardian to get annoyed about things, and yet he can't even inform himself about his neighbour's name. There's a huge lack of humanity within him and a lack of knowledge. He's not knowledgeable at all, is he? What is knowledge if not connection? And he can't even connect with his neighbour. He actively acts knowledge. He only scoops up this knowledge to kind of construct an image of himself as an erudite, well-mannered family man or whatever. I think there's a lot of consistency of characterization really when you start unpacking it in these ways, which is quite interesting. And I think a lot of Moffat characters are kind of constructed in that way, probably partially because of the autobiographical elements maybe, but I think there's also a great deal of self-awareness when Moffat kind of writes quietly unlikable characters in some ways like that. So I think that all holds together pretty well. Yeah, I think Moffat is too fundamentally self-aware to write a thing about this kind of this kind of liberals, this kind of normal domestic people, without kind of getting at their own their problems. But he could never just write people. Oh, what happened since 2016? Without poking, I guess, at the blinkeredness of the people saying that kind of thing. Even if he is sort of one of them and he's doing it in a self-deprecating kind of way, he will nonetheless poke at that stuff. And I love that, Tyler, you bring up shows like Have I Got News for You, and how all of those bubbly comedians and centrist comedians are, in a way, constantly fraternizing with the people who they claim are the root of all evil, fraternizing with Boris Johnson, because I think ultimately they're all there is kinship between them. That's the thing. They all share, in a way, this sort of overall, they share this environment. Those fucking horrific politicians are kind of chummy, very chummy, all these media centrist figures. And I think almost there is a parallel to the way in which Elsa slots so well into the Lindels' lives once they actually just embrace her. So I think Moffat is sort of... So rather than just uncomplicatedly writing this sort of liberal fantasy, he is sort of implicitly writing about the way in which liberals are just terribly comfortable at the end of the day with these problematic figures, the ones who they will point to and blame for all the evils of the world. They are complicit, I think is the word that I'm kind of dancing around here. It's about complicity.
They're establishment, and they're at the top of society, and London is a different world, a different culture to anywhere else that I've ever been or ever heard of, in the sense that all of these people whether, on whatever end of the political spectrum, if you're earning over a certain threshold in London, if you're earning over, say, 80 grand a year, you're one of these people. And what you're talking about reminds me of, you sometimes see like Labour politicians out and about with Conservative politicians, and they're just sort of laughing and giggling in Parliament or whatever, and it just sort of feels so disconnected from reality because they're in London and they're rich. So yeah, they might differ on like policy making.
It's a big club and we're not in it.
Exactly, that's exactly it. Yeah,
I think this kind of idea was explored in a comedic way in that dialogue towards the end, where Elsa says, "Debbie Lindell, I'm surprised at you. Do you really think it's possible to judge 20 years of marriage on one murder?" And Peter says, "Well, if one of you murdered the other, yes, kind of." And Elsa says, "Oh, for God's sake. I mean, geez, look into your hearts in a very real, human sense. Haven't we all at some point murdered a few people?"
I have one more thing that I kind of noticed as a maybe slight running theme with Moffat. There are quite a few gags about physical difference and weight. I think Elsa says a lot of stuff about, she's talking about Barnaby's daughter and how she's so fat you could skin her and cover a sofa and stuff about, his mother only had one eye. And it reminded me of in The Witch is Familiar, I think, like 12 was going on about Davros having only Daleks having only one eye and being in a wheelchair and all this stuff. It strikes me that Moff seems to really like to lean on those kind of sort of mean cracks about physical difference and people like having different bodies and people's weight. And there you have the pilot, of course, Bill's monologue about the girl who she fed loads of chips and she became fat. Like, I'm just wondering, it seems like to be an unaddressed undercurrent in Moff's writing of late. Maybe not of late, maybe it's been going on longer, but I think the idea that he can get a cheap and easy gag out of basically lampooning people's bodies and people who are shaped differently. You see what I mean? That strikes me as kind of a not all that necessary and maybe kind of cruel undercurrent in Moffat's writing. Obviously, in this case, he gives a lot of it to Elsa, who is set up as the murderer character, the bad person. But nonetheless, those are laugh lines. He is writing them in as gags. He's inviting the audience to laugh. So I think to a certain degree, you can't really wash your hands of that kind of humour. I think if you put it in. Yeah, it's a fairly trivial thing. It just strikes me as one of Moffat's recurring tics that's popping up.
I don't know, that it reminds me of that thing that 12 says about Clara's hips. It's a big culture thing. It's kind of, I think it's because we up until sort of the 80s. I mean, I don't want to. It sounds ridiculous, but it is kind of true. Up until sort of the 80s or 90s, there was not really, people were not really overweight. It wasn't really a thing. It like in the post-war decades, it didn't really happen. So around the time that American sort of commercialization of food and products and sugar and all of that kind of fast food and all of that kind of stuff came to the UK, it did start becoming a bit more normal, and what that resulted in. Abigail Thorne has a really good video on this from a few years ago before she came out. She had a really good video about the moral panic of fatness, the fat epidemic in the early 2000s, and I think that actually is what RTD was engaging with the Slithian stuff. Obviously, with fat cats and all of that kind of thing. But I think one of the things he was engaging with was tabloid moral panics about fatness and fast food, and that kind of culture has stayed, and definitely, like, certainly in people that are of an age where they can remember cultural fat phobia being so big as it was. So it does stick in writing of people over 40 odd.
Reminds me of that episode of Black Mirror where they have that video game where they're simulating shooting all the fat people, and the fat people are like sort of the underclass of society. Yeah, it does seem like that sort of that tendency towards that streak of nastiness towards particular types of bodies it's definitely hung around in Britain. I mean, it's self-evident. we don't need to like dredge it all up. It's all kind of very obvious about British culture. This is sort of unrelated. I have another question, just one last question for Tyler about having watched the play. Were the kids, did they feel humanised? Because I feel like there's a possibility with these kind of teenage characters in this kind of play that they come off incredibly two-dimensional and annoying. Because they're given these annoying behaviours. Like Alex is constantly like, Mom, Mom, Mom. And Rosie is like, oh, you should pay attention to me. I'm self-absorbed. So I'm just wondering, did the actors give any particular dimensions to those characters, or were they just kind of those sort of cardboard, sort of cut-out annoying teens that you get in this kind of old boomer sort of writing teenagers.
It is more that than anything else. But the actors, Alex was a bit more. There was a bit more of interest, I suppose, to what he did and the way that he chose to deliver lines. And the mum stuff is grating, but obviously it's supposed to be. And I think the way that he does it is quite good. And he draws it out and he really whines as he does it, and it's all right. But yeah, the characters, you can't escape what's in the script. The characters are nothing characters. They're just stereotypes of teenagers, middle-class teenagers.
Yeah, I think maybe it doesn't help the play overall, I think, because when you have this whole thing of this family that's in a crisis in a way, I think the fact that the relationships and kind of the thing that the Peter and Debbie are worried about is their kids, obviously, and the fact that those relationships between the four of them don't feel all that fleshed out. They feel kind of less than nuanced in some ways. They feel a bit kind of not quite there. I think it makes the whole thing feel like there aren't. It makes the stakes feel a bit wishy-washy, is what I found. I mean, obviously, I didn't see it. Like, I didn't see the actors bringing their own sense of like life to it. But I think, in terms of just on a writing level, I think the whole thing feels quite thin on the ground. And obviously, you might say that because it's a comedy, it's a frothy comedy. It doesn't need that much. But I also think when it comes to comedy and farce in particular, higher stakes are actually a good thing because they let you really squeeze out the maximum comedy, I think. Because comedy, in a sense, is almost it's like averted tragedy in some ways. Things that are incredibly high risk and high stakes for the characters are where you get the most discomfort and the most fun, almost. So I feel the fact that it all feels a bit light and thin, I think maybe doesn't help with the humour overall. Those are just kind of my impressions. I don't know how much that plays out as a true thing in the actual production.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
I get the impression you found it underwhelming overall coming out of it, like the show, compared to your friend who you watched it with, who really liked it.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, massively underwhelming. Yeah, massive. I was. I don't know. I because I'd made such an effort for so long, for so many years, and because I'd made such an effort that day, that weekend, I'd had to travel quite a way across the country and stay at home, and I had to find ways to justify it in my mind. And I to be fair, it is true that I did laugh. I laughed quite a bit, and that's pretty much all I can say for it. Really, I thought when it came to the script and the staging of it, the Mark Gatiss's direction, everything, I didn't find there was nothing really interesting of note. There was nothing interesting to say about this play, which I guess is fine if...
The impression I'm getting from what you're saying is I think it's a misalignment of expectation things. We had that entirely facetious, this is a complete joke term, but when we said Steven Moffat connoisseur at the top of this discussion, it's if you're going into it like us, as people who've seen most of what he's done, and trying to link it to other works of his and find shared themes and progression of certain styles and that, I guess you're putting more of a mountain of expectations on it then, which I don't think is unfair in the sense that he's as good a writer as ever. I think some of his recent work has been some of his best ever work. But I guess just the play itself, it's like that Mark Gatiss, is it just funny anecdote he shared about shopping the play around. I guess misaligned expectations might be what you're kind of talking about there, Tyler.
If you're going to buy the script and you're going to analyse it with your Steven Moffat connoisseur lens on, it's just not going to work for you. And I did make the mistake of going into it with the Steven Moffat connoisseur thing going on. If I were to see it again, I sort of think I wouldn't. I wouldn't even be averse to seeing it again. I would go and see it again, and I think I would enjoy it more because I know what to expect now. I know to expect bathroom humour. I know to expect running gags with a decent payoff that don't mean anything. I know the form of this play. I just hope that it doesn't stick because I think Moffat is so much better than this.
I think to think about it holistically, it seems like it's targeted at the kind of people who can go see it casually.
Oh God, yes.
Rather than people who have to travel a great distance and put a huge amount of effort and time and money into going to see it.
That's a really good point. I'm glad that you brought that up because I do remember saying that to my friends as I left. I remember saying this was really not the sort of play you want to travel to see. It's the sort of play that you want to hop on the tube from Ealing And you want to spend 30 minutes on the tube max. You don't really want to travel in from the lengths that I was traveling from, which sort of makes me glad that I didn't go all the way to Chichester and stay overnight and do all that craziness over it, because it's just not worth it. It's just not that kind of play. It is for people that frequent the West End and can afford it and can very easily get to and from.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up our discussion on the Unfriend. If you have seen it, we would love to hear all about it. Please comment away with your thoughts on all that. If you've just read it, like myself, please let us know what you thought of that. And if you've only heard our discussion, does it make you more interested in the play? Are you going to try and read it? Are you going to try and see it if it somehow did come near you? Let us know that as well. And as always, thanks loads for listening. Cheers.